Imagine this: two powerful warships, one American, one British, slicing through the Taiwan Strait. On one side, China's Navy and Air Force scramble to shadow them. On the other, the US and UK calmly insist they're just exercising their right to free navigation under international law. But here's the real question: is this just routine? Or are we watching the slow buildup to one of the most dangerous flashpoints on Earth? Let's start with the news itself. When the USS Higgins and HMS Richmond entered the Taiwan Strait, Beijing didn't just issue a statement. It acted. The Eastern Theater Command of the People's Liberation Army ordered warships and fighter jets to track the Allied vessels from the moment they crossed into the strait. Chinese destroyers moved into position to shadow them at close distance, while surveillance aircraft orbited above, maintaining constant watch. Radar stations along the coast were activated, and Chinese commanders boasted that their forces had the situation under full control. In practical terms, this wasn't a battle. No shots were fired, but the choreography was deliberate. Every maneuver, every shadowing vessel, every radio warning transmitted in stern Mandarin was designed to send a message. You are being watched, and you are not welcome here. For Western navies, this is familiar territory. But for the audience at home, it's worth pausing here. These weren't symbolic protests. These were real ships, real aircraft, and real military forces moving into action, ready to escalate if things went wrong. So on one side, two NATO-aligned warships asserting freedom of navigation. On the other, a rapid Chinese military response, shadowing them every mile of the way. That's why this wasn't just a routine transit. It was a carefully staged confrontation, the kind of theater where even a small miscalculation could have explosive consequences. To understand why this matters, we need to zoom out. The South China Sea is one of the most contested waterways in the world. It carries about 1/3 of global shipping, trillions of dollars worth of trade every year. Whoever controls these waters controls a vital artery of the global economy. That's why the US Navy maintains a heavy presence here, supported by allies. These operations aren't just about Taiwan. They're about keeping sea lanes open, reassuring partners, and deterring China. So who are the allies? Japan, increasing its defense spending, modernizing its navy, and hosting US bases. Australia, a central part of the UK-US security pact, building nuclear-powered submarines with US and UK help. The Philippines, recently revitalized military ties with Washington, allowing US access to bases close to the South China Sea. South Korea, not as vocal on the South China Sea, but still a crucial US ally in the region. India, not a treaty ally, but increasingly part of joint exercises and the Quad Group with the US, Japan, and Australia. These countries form a loose but powerful coalition aimed at balancing China's growing assertiveness at sea. In recent months, the US Navy has maintained a robust and visible posture across the South China Sea and adjacent strategic waterways. The USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group has been conducting routine flight operations, both day and night, with fixed and rotary wing aircraft in the South China Sea as part of its deployment under the US 7th Fleet, aimed at reinforcing deterrence and readiness. Additionally, the USS Carl Vinson has been operating in disputed areas of the South China Sea, engaging in standard carrier strike group patrols and flight operations, underlining the U.S. commitment to freedom of navigation in contested waters. Other naval assets, such as guided missile destroyers and cruisers, also frequently make transit through the Taiwan Strait and conduct freedom of navigation exercises. For example, the USS William P. Lawrence made a solo transit through the Taiwan Strait earlier in 2025, and other vessels accompanied joint patrols and cooperations with regional partners. Now, let's flip perspectives. China has invested massively in its navy, now the largest in the world by a number of ships. Its fleets regularly patrol the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea, escorting commercial vessels, monitoring foreign navies, and projecting power. But beyond patrolling, China has pursued a bold, controversial strategy, building islands out of reefs and shoals. In the Spratly and Paracel Islands, China has dredged land, expanded tiny outcroppings, and turned them into fortified outposts. We're talking about runways capable of handling fighter jets, radar installations, missile systems, and deep water harbors for warships. From China's perspective, these artificial islands are a way to secure territorial claims and defend its coastline. Beijing calls it legitimate construction on its own territory. But from the perspective of the U.S. and its allies, it's a creeping attempt to turn international waters into a Chinese lake. These islands sit hundreds of miles from the mainland, often within the exclusive economic zones of other countries like the Philippines and Vietnam. This brings us back to the Taiwan Strait transit. Every time U.S. and allied ships sail through, they're sending a message. We don't recognize China's sweeping claims. And every time China responds with warnings and deployments, it's saying, we won't let you undermine our sovereignty. It's a cycle of action and reaction. The danger isn't just in the politics, it's in the possibility of an accident. Imagine a U.S. destroyer shadowed by a Chinese frigate just a few hundred meters away. One wrong maneuver, one miscommunication, and suddenly the world faces a military crisis. And remember, this isn't happening in isolation. It's tied to the fate of Taiwan, the future of global trade, and the credibility of alliances across the Indo-Pacific. You might be wondering, why should an average viewer care about some ships far away? Here's why. Global economy. If conflict erupts here, shipping lanes could be blocked, driving up prices for everything from oil to electronics. Alliances and security. A clash in the Taiwan Strait could drag in the U.S. NATO allies and regional partners, potentially spiraling into a global conflict. The precedent? If international law is ignored in the South China Sea, what stops other powers from doing the same in different regions? This isn't just a local dispute, it's a test case for the world order. So, what began as the simple transit of two ships, the USS Higgins and HMS Richmond, is really a snapshot of a much bigger struggle. Freedom of navigation versus territorial claims, alliances versus nationalism, the rule of law versus raw power. China is building islands, expanding its navy, and declaring vast maritime claims. The US and its allies are pushing back, determined to keep the seas open. The Taiwan Strait may look calm on the surface, but beneath the waves, the currents of history are pulling us toward confrontation. The question is, will cooler heads prevail, or are we heading for a storm? If you found this analysis helpful, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment with your thoughts. Do you think the US and its allies should continue these operations? Or is it too risky? Because in this story, the stakes couldn't be higher. And it's not just about ships, it's about the future of global order itself.